Welcome back to Ireland AM. Now, as the Minister of State at the Department of Finance, our next guest, was closer than most to Budget 2024. She has it all here with her.
We're going to get all the details. So, let's dig into those details now with Fine Gael TD and Junior Minister Jennifer Carroll MacNeill. Good morning to you. Listen, it's in front of a lot of the papers this morning. One for everybody in the audience. Giveaways, tax breaks. But then if you look at it, all the recommendations I saw from every economist was, don't do it. You risk overheating the economy. In a time of already high inflation, it looks like it's going down. And the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council have said, don't do it, don't risk it. But you have done it. The government has done it. Why?
So we've done two things that we have. Like the Fiscal Advisory Council suggested that we create a new fund, for example, to future-proof our finances for the future. And that actually was the biggest announcement yesterday, this Future Ireland Fund, that we're going to put 4 billion in initially, but then 0.8% of GDP over the next number of years.
Which is excellent, because you have the money there. You have the money to do it.
Yeah, but the point of it is to try to create a fund of €100 billion by 2035. And that doesn't matter today, but what it means is in 2035, we can spend off the top of that the government has the discretion to do that. That brings us into the territory of places like Norway, where we have our own sovereign wealth fund. It doesn't matter today, but I tell you, the people sitting here 20 years from now are going to be the beneficiaries of that, and it's a hugely important thing that happened yesterday that IFAC recommended.
Well.
That's right. And so we have to straddle this pressure as well. The economists, I respect everything that they say, and we stay within the parameters, but we also have to provide supports in a reasonable way to people at a time of considerable pressure. And so we try to do that in a way that doesn't create extra inflation. So, for example, last year we faced similar questions, quite reasonable questions. Inflation last year was 8%, and notwithstanding the supports that we brought into the economy, which is a risky thing to do, inflation came down to 5% this year. And notwithstanding these supports, we still anticipate that inflation will get to 2% next year. Now, this is an extraordinary time of inflation, and it's very, very difficult. And I suppose from a government perspective and from a legitimacy perspective, looking after people, you have to try to help people through this period, but also not create too many inflationary pressures. And that's why most of our supports are very targeted. They're targeted at people at the much more vulnerable end of the scale, and targeted at people who are working and under considerable pressure. And that's why that tax package is there. That's why that double child benefit is there, the energy credits, because we recognise that it is a difficult period.
Do you think they're targeted because for an awful lot of people who are doing quite well in life, and you've got the mortgage interest relief, there will be by September 2024, 50% decrease in childcare costs, where there's issues within certain childcare services about people not being paid properly in relation to that, and someone's making money somewhere, that perhaps this isn't means tested well enough, that it is one for everyone in the audience, and not everyone in the audience needs something.
But it isn't, though. It isn't. I mean, there's another example. Like, the childcare cost is something that has been too expensive, and we want to structurally reduce that permanently, and that's why those changes are there. But if you look at the payments that are being made to people, they're overwhelmingly focused on people who are getting fuel allowance, they're people who are getting carers benefit, and we're even extending the means threshold to try to bring more people into that for the second time in a couple of years. So the only credits where their universality is the energy credits, where there's a double child benefit for people with children up to 18, of course. But everything else is weighted in terms of working family payment. That is a group of people who really, really need extra supports. And the other sorts of supports that I know Norma Foley was talking about around free books and that, all of these things add up to try to reduce structural costs and give a little extra money without banking it into the books for forever and ever. So trying to straddle it in slightly different ways.
You've been very vocal about housing and say we need it. Why are we not seeing more housing and an increase in the social housing we built this year?
There hasn't been. It's just Housing for All.
Well, yes. So a couple of years ago, we were criticised for not having a multi-annual plan, that we were doing this on a year-on-year basis. So we published Housing for All, which is a multi-annual plan, and we have set out in advance what the figures are going to be. We know what the capacity, we know how many people are working in construction. Construction unemployment is 2%. It's practically nothing. So we could extend the targets, but not in a realistic way, not in a way that's going to be met. We know that we have the budget, the funding, the plan there, and we produce this multi-annual plan.
We're not hitting that plan. not hitting the budget.
We have reduced it, which is due to the lack of people that we have working in the sector and being able to actually deliver that. So there's no point in saying we'll double the budget on that without being able to deliver it. There has to be a measure of realism in it.
But if you were to put money at it, then there would actually
But that's
hit
not
the things.
so. You still have to have, for example, you still have to have enough engineers in the state. You were talking about the pressure on teachers.
And there's full employment in relation
we have
to
full employment on everything.
the construction sector, but it is going to change in relation to the fact that all these plans we had for office buildings are not going to happen, and there's going to be a big issue with that and whether they should be converted into homes. But let's talk about when it does come to housing, something that you do talk about, that we never tackle vulture funds in relation to how they're allowed to buy in this country. Really, like there's buy-to-let all over the place. People who want to get on the property ladder and they can't. You can have vulture funds going into housing estates and go, you know, I'm just going to buy a bunch of houses inside there. There is a cap on what that they can buy, but it feels kind of hopeless that we're just going to, for an awful lot of people, they're like, I'm just going to have to rent in this country forever.
Well, you know, I understand why you're saying that, but if I look at the facts and I look at the number of first-time buyers that are getting not just mortgages but homes, in the mortgage figures for July, there was 700 first-time buyers getting mortgages a week. Now, there's 400 first-time buyers buying homes a week. Now, that's every week. That's 400, and that's not individuals. That's individuals or couples. So the activity is absolutely there. So it can't be that it's that hopeless when we see that activity. I do not underestimate how difficult it is. I do not underestimate the affordability challenge. But yet it is still happening. And we have the Help to Buy scheme, which 40,000 people or couples have benefited from, which is your tax back. Now, there's other parties that want to abolish that. I think it's madness. We want to try and create supply. We want to try and make sure that we meet the affordability challenge. We have a shared equity scheme for people to try to balance out the portion where you can't get the extra, you know, you can't get the full mortgage.
Do you think Help
to
to Buy
try
is
to
driving
provide
up houses, though? Do you think
it's always a risk. It's always a risk,
prices?
and that's why it was focused on new homes rather than existing homes. So, you know, and then people will say to me, well, why can't it be for a second-hand home? And I totally understand that too. But again, you're trying to do things that are going to generate supply rather than try to be demand-side pressures all the time. And that is not an easy thing, and you're trying to help people through this difficult process all the time.
We have a huge amount of messages in about carers, very concerned about yesterday's budget, the €12 increase in disability carers allowance. Even one looking at Michael here, recently retired, having paid PRSI and PAYE for 47 years. All I get is €12 increase in my pension. What difference is that going to make to me?
Well,
and they feel that they're the people that are missing out.
Let me address carers first and then pensions, if I may. The carers we've made two really significant changes over the last 2-3 years with Heather Humphreys, which is that we extended the eligibility for carers for people who have been caring for a loved one but not getting anything from the state. So 2 years ago, Heather increased that from €332 just on a weekly income. That's way up now. That's gone up to $450 and beyond, and up to $450 now. We also increased what's called the savings disregard. So she did it 2 years ago, and she's done it again. The point of that is to bring more people into carers, so they're either getting a full carers allowance or half carers. And I would encourage anybody who maybe have applied in the past and didn't get it to apply again because the thresholds have changed so much. And yes, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying on the pensioners' side, and you have €12 increase, but you also have the lump sum for fuel allowance. For, you know, the fuel allowance, we brought in most people over 70, for example, last year into that.
There is lots of costs.
There's a lot of different supports, but that is targeted at that same group. So it's not just about a 12-week, it's also about the living alone allowance, the fuel allowance, the different lump sums, the extra pension, not just before Christmas, but in January too. So it's not just one thing, and it's a combined measure. And I'd ask people, anybody who's having difficulty navigating it, email me and we'll try and set it out, because I appreciate it's hard. Yeah, I've got an easier one.
Minister of State at the Department of Finance, someday maybe Minister at the Department of Finance. Jennifer Carroll MacNeill, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking time this morning.